This meeting is being recorded.
No, we cannot, Ron. Ron, you have to go to share screen at the bottom of your screen. Click on that and bring up a white box. And in the white box, that's where you select the actual desktop that you want us to see, which in this case would be your PowerPoint presentation. Everyone should have heard that recording has started. So again, just a reminder, we'll be sending out a copy of this presentation to all of you sometime early next week.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes, it is, and I'm just going to end my program in the background. Yes, full screen. Ron, take it away.
Well, good morning. Just a brief introduction. I'm sorry I was a bit late getting started. I had a little bit of trouble logging on to Zoom this morning. But anyways, I'm here now. So I'd like to just begin by giving you a little bit of brief introduction about myself and what we're going to talk about this morning. I joined the Homes Club as a junior member 50 years ago. And since then, I've held an executive position within the society for the past 43 years as secretary. I'm also the International Division's Achievement Program Manager and would be happy to discuss the AP with anybody that's interested. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a neighborhood adjacent to the TH&B's Kinnear Yard in Hamilton. The Homes Club members researched and designed several different variations of brick houses. Over 30 scratch-built houses were fabricated from plastic brick sheet, and titchy details were going to be needed. After completing the first 4, 2 members began to create 3D printed houses in both PLA plastic and in resin. The results were far more economical and much less time-consuming than scratch building each structure. This morning, we'll take a look at the various prototype architecture, how to finish the 3D printed house kit, and additional details that can be scratch built to enhance the model. So just to begin, the area that we're talking about in Hamilton is between Wentworth Street and Sanford Avenue. This is a really compact little neighborhood. And as you can see from this Google image, there were 22 houses on the north side of the street and 26 houses on the south side of the street. So very, very compact. And you'll see from the photographs how close together these houses are. Just to the left or right, I'm sorry, of Sanford is Lifesaver Park and the Lifesaver factory, the factory that made the small ring-shaped candies years ago. So this is kind of the scene that we're trying to recreate. Here's a Google image from the air, and you can see how densely those houses are packed together along Cumberland Avenue. And in the bottom corner of the picture, you can see where the TH&B main line is in behind those houses. So this is part of what we're trying to create between Wentworth Street and as far east as Burris Avenue. Just to take a look at some of the houses that were on the north side of Cumberland Avenue, I just want to point out some of the architectural details that we were interested in and tried to replicate some of them anyways. You can see these are all brick houses as opposed to clapboard houses, which were more common in other cities. They're 2.5 story. They are different footprints and different floor plans, but we'll take a look at some of those. Most of them had bay windows. You can see here 2 different size buildings. They generally all had a front porch, although some of them have been removed to accommodate car parking. You can see these are fairly modern photos as well, because there are satellite dishes on the front of the house on the right. Of course, we model the 1950s era, so satellite dishes on our models wouldn't really be appropriate, but the odd TV antenna might be. You can see that the roof gutters here are less than 12 inches apart. So the lots are very narrow and really not very deep either. So these are relatively small houses in comparison to some of them that are being built today. We suspect these houses were built right around the time of the First World War. We're not quite sure before or after, but probably late teens, early 20s. And even though the footprint may change, the overall design is very similar. And you can see that the house on the left here is significantly bigger than the house on the right. And yet the overall design is not that much different. There's been a lot of modern upgrades to these houses over the past 100 years. The house on the left has wrought iron porch posts that have replaced the probably wooden posts on this particular model or house. And on the right-hand side, the columns are half brick and half wood, which is also a fairly common feature. Here you can see two different columns holding up the porch roof, and even a slightly different porch roof angle. The one on the right appears to have a much bigger or deeper bay window. Another modern improvement is that some of the houses have now been painted, as you can see in the house on the left. And some houses have added ornamental shutters as well. The one on the right, the entire porch has been removed. And again, that's to create a driveway and a place to park the car. It's really hard to get pictures of the sides of these houses because they're so close together. So the best option was to look for a house that was on the corner. So here's an example of those two houses we just previously looked at, the one that was painted a beige color and then the one beside it with the ornamental shutters. This gives you a better idea of what the side of the house looked like. Just a couple of bedroom windows. One of them actually could be a bathroom. It looks like this particular house had an addition put on the back as well. And we have not modeled those additions, as we didn't feel they were probably there back in the late 40s and early 50s. This is the corner house that has that gray garage in the backyard. You can see that this house, they've added a bump out on the side of the house in clapboard. I'm not quite sure which room this would be. I guess it might be the dining room that they've added that bump out to. This is the same house looking at the front of it as it faces Sanford Avenue. And again, you can see some architectural details that are a little different from house to house. This one, again, having at least one wrought iron support column and metal railings. A lot of them had lattice around the bottom of the porch as well. On the opposite side of the street, the houses again were very similar, but there are a few more architectural details worth noting. Again, this is the opposite side of the street at the corner of Sanford. And again, you can see the side elevation of the house, not visible further down the street as the houses were too close together. Here you can see the different half-story windows, as these are 2.5-story houses. So it looks like the middle house has probably been modernized, even with a dormer added to the roof to increase the footprint of the half-story. Those half stories could be clapboard, they could be shingle, they could be scalloped. And again, that's all little details that can be added to the 3D printed kit by including a piece of styrene in that area. Here's a good example of how the front porches have been removed for parking, and quite a variation in the color of the brick that's been protected for years and years and is now exposed. There were some other designed houses along Cumberland Avenue with saddle roof pitches to the front with dormers. These were not very common, but there were just a few of them along Cumberland Avenue. But again, the houses are extremely close together. It looks to me like the eaves might be 6 to 8 inches apart at this point. And here's looking down between a couple of houses just to emphasize the fact that the foundations were extremely close together. Here's just a couple of variations in the porch roof fascia. You can see the one on the left has a fascia and shorter columns. The one on the right has much taller and more substantial brick columns. And the brick on the house on the right goes right to the roof eaves, which is an unusual detail for most of these houses. Most had clapboard in the half story. Very few of these houses had side driveways. As a matter of fact, these are the only two that had side driveways. And I suspect that's only because there just wasn't quite enough land to put in that extra house. So these two happen to get driveways, but they are very narrow driveways. This is the house at the corner of Wentworth and Cumberland Avenue. And again, being a corner house gives us an opportunity to see the side and the rear of the house. There's a number of things that have been changed on this particular house. You can see they've added a staircase, probably a second floor apartment has been created in this particular one, as well as an addition on the bottom left corner made of clapboard, and the bump out on the side of the house. These houses along Wentworth Street were substantially bigger than the ones along Cumberland Avenue, but still of basically the same architecture. So the TH&B tracks are just to the right of the photograph here. There's the same three houses. I'm now standing on the TH&B right away, looking back towards these three houses. So an opportunity to see, again, the side of one of the houses with the dormer up on the roof. So standing on Wentworth Street, looking towards the escarpment or looking south is Wentworth Street as it approaches the access to the escarpment. In the foreground is the TH&B main line. And just above the roof line of the SUV in the background, you can see a rail trail, which was originally the CNR Hagersville subdivision. On the opposite side of the street were a variety store and 3 1.5-story houses. So we also wanted to capture these buildings. So again, these are much smaller houses. They're only a story and a half, but they do have some interesting architectural features. This is the one directly adjacent to the TH&B. They all have side driveways. This one looks like it could use a little TLC, but nevertheless, it's the style of house that we want to put on the layout. So the best way to see the backs of the houses was to walk down the TH&B main line east. So let's just take a look at the backs of some of these houses and look at some of the architectural features. And you can see that in some cases, the chimney was at the back of the house as opposed to at the side. This particular house has got an addition on the back. This is a good project to do in early spring or in the fall when there's no leaves on the trees. Gives you a better opportunity to see into these backyards. You can see how one of the windows on the left-hand house has been opened up and made into a door with its own staircase. So probably a second floor apartment. Here's the back of the houses that had the saddle roof, where it's pitched towards the street, just to give you the difference in the architecture. They've also added an addition on the back of the house. And again, these lots are quite narrow. Most of them have fences between the houses. And then getting back out to Sanford Avenue, again, you can see the side and the rear of the houses that we previously looked at. Most of these houses were of two different types of brick, this orangey shade of brick, and then a much deeper shade of brownish colored brick. So just to conclude a little bit about the architecture, so you can see that there's numerous styles of houses and different sizes between Wentworth Street and Sanford. Most of them being 2.5 story, and almost all of them with a bay window. There were some more 1.5 story houses moving west or moving east towards Gage Park. So let's talk a little bit about the modeling aspect. So creating a neighborhood. Probably the first step was to do a lot of field research and take a lot of pictures. It's really difficult sometimes to get these kind of pictures. People's privacy is extremely important. I parked the car and walked up and down the street, walked up and down the TH&B main line to get as many photos as I could. Got a few dirty looks from people. Before I got back in the car, a police cruiser went by, didn't stop. But I really wonder whether people were wondering what I was up to, taking pictures of their houses. So you have to make sure that you respect people's privacies. That also makes it very difficult to get any real accurate measurements. So we were able to draw some elevations using common architecture sizes. We did consider scratch building these houses, and in fact really did scratch build a handful of them, but we realized that was going to be quite an undertaking. We considered laser cut houses, and although two of the guys in the club have lasers, neither one was really interested in drawing them up and creating laser cut houses. So we considered 3D printed houses and did in fact end up using 3D printed houses for the majority of the neighborhood. So one of the first steps was to draw up some scale diagrams. And Dave Patterson, a member of our Homes Club, drew these drawings up, again, using some really basic dimensions taken from the photographs. Side view of what he referred to as a Cumberland number 2. That was just a designation he gave to it. He also took a look through the catalog to find out what Tichy windows would be appropriate, and other details like the railings, etc., on the porch, the chimneys, things like that, that we might purchase if we were going to scratch build these houses. But we determined that by the time we bought something like Walther's brick sheet, and then all the windows and extra details that we would require to scratch build these particular models, they were going to start to get pretty expensive, particularly when we needed as many as we did. So this is the area of the club layout that we would be using. Cumberland Avenue, you can see in the foreground as it passes Sanford Avenue. The foundation that's on the left-hand bottom corner is the foundation for the Lifesaver building. Cumberland takes a little bit of a jog at Sanford Avenue and then continues on Cumberland Avenue over to Wentworth Street. So to try to get an appreciation for what this scene might look like, one of the fellows in the club made wooden mock-ups of 3D structures, just so we could sort of place them along the street, see what it was going to begin to look like. This is the same area, but taken from the opposite end. So you can see Wentworth Street in the foreground, Cumberland Avenue, and then the jog that it takes toward Sanford. So based on the available space, we originally estimated we were going to need 28 houses. So most of them were 2.5 story, a few 1.5 story, a variety store. So a little bit of different architecture was required, but the 2.5 story were by far the most prominent houses required. In fact, we actually are going to end up with, I think, 32 houses as we move the houses even closer together to make it look more prototypical. We managed to squeeze in a few extras. So this 3D model was built by Yelton Models. It's of the pre-production kit. So the very first one that was ever printed and built by Dan Notley. These were designed using the drawings that Dave Patterson created. And you can see it's been finished appropriately for what we would.
This meeting is being recorded.
So the Yelton Models kit is a PLA plastic printed kit. You can see the parts that come in the kit. Basically 4 walls, a roof, and a chimney. And in the center of the picture are 2 sets of stairs, the railings for the front porch, and 2 different styles of porch columns. So it's a pretty basic kit. It's not particularly difficult to put together. But the first thing that you always need to do when you take a look at a 3D printed kit is to look for printing errors, strings, warts, things like that that are a result of the printing process. And these kits are exactly that. You know, there are things that you need to double check and make sure that the kit is ready to be assembled. Some tools that might come in handy include a couple of different X-Acto blades. I found a sprue cutter was good for removing the kind of strings that come from PLA type printing. Fingernail files, all handy tools for cleaning up the 3D print. One of the most important things was to make sure that the corners were actually chamfered at 45 degrees. And as a result of a possible printing error, sometimes they're not. And as you can see in the little diagram to the right, if in fact that those pieces are not exactly 45 degrees, you end up with a gap on the outside edge of the wall. Now that can be repaired, and I'll show you how to do that. But if you can clean up that inside corner, it might save you some time. Now I use ACC to put these together. Gorilla Glue I'm sure would work just as well, but I didn't find any other adhesives that were very successful. Things like lacquer thinners and tester cement and stuff like that just will not work on these products. So it's really important to make sure that the 4 walls are square to one another. In this particular case, you can see that the chimney is facing to the right here in the back wall. I would suggest taking those 2 walls and very carefully with very sparing ACC is join those 2 wall sections together and make sure they're square. Don't run a bead of ACC down there. Just put a couple of dots to hold it until you're absolutely sure that it's square. Then flip over to the opposite corner and put the front and other side wall together. Let it all set up and harden. and then you can continue to put the building together as a four-wall structure. It's really important that it remains square. Now, these pieces of wood do not come in the kit. I added them only because you're going to handle this building a lot before you finish, and that's from painting and adding details, etc. And I just felt that putting in a piece of wood in each corner would help to stiffen those corners and make it less likely to fall apart, since the edges are so small where they're glued together. In this particular case, the rear wall has a window in the back door. The wood would have covered up the window, so I've notched out the wood just to prevent that. So I said, if the walls go together and you do have a slight gap at the two corners, at the corner of the two walls, it can be repaired. What I do is get a little bit of ACC, put it in a little bit of a puddle, probably on some paper, and then put the blade into the puddle, not the tip of the blade, but the whole blade itself, and then transfer that glue to the gap between the two walls. Before it has a chance to set up and dry, sprinkle on some baking soda, exactly the same stuff that you find in your kitchen. Just sprinkle it on. Don't worry about where it goes. It'll only stick to where the ACC is. And then you can wait until that sets up and dry to shape it. So at this point, you'll have to re-groove some of those mortar lines, and you can use a fine triangle file, or even the broken end of an X-Acto blade worked fairly well to re-groove that. So at this point, you should have the four walls assembled. It should be pretty rigid. I would suggest taking a piece of 220 grit sandpaper and in kind of a circular motion, lightly sand the top and bottom of the walls just to make sure everything's level and flat. That'll be important when you add it to the foundation. It'll also be important when you put the roof on. As far as painting, I think these kind of kits lend themselves to most types of painting, whether you want to use a rattle can, an acrylic artist type paint, pigment, which are really cheap from places like Walmart, or even an airbrush. Any of those methods would work fine. If you decide to use a rattle can, for example, I've painted the windows white, which seem to be very common on all these houses. It is a bit time consuming with a very small brush to paint all those window frames, but well worth the time and effort. Don't forget, while you've got the white paint out, that you could also paint the skirting below the porch deck and the edges of the porch roof. You may also want to paint the gable end of the roof section as well, white. Now, I used a little bit different method here. We were making so many of these. As a matter of fact, we will end up with 24 of these kits on the layout. So I thought, well, there's got to be an easier way than spending 2 or 3 hours hand painting all the details, like the windows, etc. So I thought, well, what if I was to paint the windows first with an airbrush? So I did. I painted them white. Then I measured them with a vernier caliper and made up these pieces of plastic that fit right into the brick opening, and used those to cut out pieces of masking tape that fit directly into the opening, protecting the white paint. Now I color coded them. You can see in the foreground here, there's a red and yellow one, a double yellow. I think that might be black on black, because there are different sizes. So you need somehow to differentiate the different templates to cut out the masking tape. So here's the house with the masking tape added to the porch, as well as the porch roof, as well as the windows. And I've airbrushed one wall just to give the contrast between the unpainted PLA plastic and the wall itself. So when you remove the masking tape, you know, if you've done a neat job, there shouldn't be too much touching up to do. Don't forget when you paint the brick that you also need to paint the chimney and the porch columns if you're using brick porch columns. The other piece I mentioned there was the chimney. The chimney, you could paint the chimney cap a light gray. The chimney flue would typically be made of terracotta, so it's kind of an orangey color. And inside that, black. But again, don't forget to paint this to match the brick of the house. The next step was to paint the windowsills and the foundation around the bottom of the house. I just used a gray primer for that purpose, and it was done just with a brush. And then when it was dry, I used Vallejo dark gray diluted wash just to bring out the detail in the foundation blocks. I tried using Robert's brick mortar on the walls after all that was done, and I wasn't really very happy with the results. I found that it dries relatively quickly. It's difficult to get off once it dries in the on the brick. Even though you use a wipe, you wipe it off with a damp cotton cloth. I just didn't care for the way that it worked. I've tried it on other structures, and I've been happy with the brick mortar formula. But on this particular model, it just didn't work as well as I'd hoped. So the next step that I did was to put on some complementary brick color washes. And you can see some of the colors. I used some rust, some flat earth, and some desert yellow. And these are just washes. They're not 100% right out of the bottle. They're very, very diluted. Just washes on different areas of the brick, just so that the side of the building, for example, doesn't look so monotone. And again, don't forget to do the columns and the chimney. Next step was to move on to the roof. I'd strongly recommend painting the roof horizontally. In other words, working your way from front to back as opposed to top to bottom, which could leave some squiggly lines as it dries. The first section dries next to the next piece that you're painting. If you work wet on wet all the way across the length of the roof, I think you'll get a much evener finish. In this particular case, I also painted the gable end window with an accent color. So I also used that same accent color to paint the railings for the front porch. The steps were painted in a porch gray, and the top of the front porch was also painted gray. Those steps could be white as well, I suppose. That's really up to the modeler, how you want to do that. But again, these are just paints that are readily available. So there's a lot of extra details that could potentially be added that don't come in the kit, and they can be scratch built. They're not particularly difficult to do. We reviewed some of the photographs that we've looked at this morning with some of the members of the club, and we came up with this list of things that would be appropriate. Some of them are era specific, like the TV antenna at the bottom doesn't really fit into a 1950s era house, but a lot of these things would be appropriate. So extra details that can be added, things like window glass, curtains, roller shades, Venetian blinds, a mailbox near the front door, the milk box near the side door. You could paint the doorknobs, add a house number. There may be chairs, tables, a bench on the front porch, flower pots, maybe a bicycle, a hydrostack and meter on the side wall near the front, furnace oil filler pipes and vents, downspouts and TV antennas. Oh, I missed one. And the clean out, etc. for the furnace, or for the chimney, not the furnace. So one of the details that you could add to the roof is a plumbing stack. The plumbing stack is just a piece of 1/16 brass tubing, about 5/8 of an inch long. I cut a piece of 10 thou styrene into a 12-inch square as a boot to go around the bottom, and drilled a 1/16 hole in the roof near the bathroom window. A relatively easy detail to add. When you glue the chimney and the plumbing stack into position, make sure that they're both vertically and horizontally in alignment, that they're not crooked. And you can see here that the plumbing stack's been painted a grimy black color. Window glazing is really easy to do with either clear acetate or styrene. I'd suggest lightly sanding, maybe with 600 grit sandpaper, the bathroom window on the inside, so it has more of a translucent look to it. But adding the glass to the inside really just requires some dabs of tacky glue. Also added curtains and roller shades, Venetian blinds to the windows. At the bottom, you can see a little plastic template that I made up to help cut out the curtains. Because I had no intention to put an interior in this building, I wasn't particularly careful about the size of the curtains, etc. I just wanted them to be visible from the outside. And because I didn't put an interior in the building, I also wanted to be sure that anyone looking into the house couldn't see all the way through, as the walls would typically prevent that. So a couple of pieces of black construction paper just glued along those edges helped to prevent that see-through look. Some extra detail parts that you might consider adding that can be scratch built. Mailboxes at the front door were just simply 30 thou by 80 thou styrene. I chamfered the top slightly and put a 10 thou thick lid on top of the mailbox and painted it black. The furnace fuel pipe and the vent pipe were made from 18-inch or 18 gauge wire and a small cap added as styrene. The milk box door for the side of the house was really just a piece of 1/8 by 1/8 by 10 thou styrene. Nothing fancy, just glued directly to the brick. And then finally, the chimney clean out, a piece of 60 thou by 125 by 10 thou styrene, again painted a grimy black color. Also wanted to add downspouts to the sides of the house, and those were bent from 18 gauge wire, solid wire. You can see a template that I made up just to get the right bends in the wire. You could either have those end right at the grade level, or they might bend away from the house to direct the water away. The challenge, though, is how do you fasten them to the house? So I make my own eye bolts, and then you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, using a piece of 25 gauge wire bent into a horseshoe shape. The two ends go into a vise. Then using some of the downspout material in the end of the horseshoe, you can hand twist that until you create an eye bolt, and then clip it off at the appropriate length. Obviously, then you need to drill holes in the brickwork to hold those downspouts, the brackets. Also note here, The roof has not been glued on at this point. If you glue the roof on, you won't be able to thread the downspout through those eye bolts. And if you pre-paint the downspout, because that's the size of the eye bolt that you've created, you won't be able to push the downspout through the hole in the eye bolt. So I put them in unpainted and then use wax paper to protect the brickwork while I paint the downspouts, in this case white. So we're getting close to finishing here. You could glue on the porch railings, the steps, the roof. I always weather everything, even if it's only subtly. A very thin formula of black paint in an airbrush. So, 5 to 10% paint and thinner, just to lightly kind of blend everything together. A little bit heavier, maybe around the bottom of the house where the rain splashes up on the foundation. So here's some of the finished details on the house. And you can see at the top there, the plumbing stack in the roof. You can see the downspout coming down with the brackets that we made. The porch railings that are painted kind of an accent color. The steps and the side door milk box. The opposite side of the house, the chimney. Again, make sure that you paint it at the same time that you do the brick to make sure that they're going to match. You can see the downspout with the brackets adjacent to the chimney, the furnace or chimney clean out near the bottom of the chimney from the old days when it would have been a coal-fired furnace. Then the furnace oil filter pipes and the vent pipe adjacent to it. And finally, the mailbox near the front door. So in conclusion, modeling an urban scene requires a considerable amount of research. Many of the structures can be expensive layout real estate. I mean, if you've looked at the price of kits and things like the Walther's catalog, to create a city scene that has as many as 32 houses on it would be a very expensive proposition. But building kits is also an expensive type of real estate as compared to a mountainside with some trees on it. Scratch building specific architecture can be very time consuming if you're going to scratch build this many houses, but new technologies are offering new modeling opportunities. It's also extremely satisfying when visitors recognize the completed neighborhood. And we've had some people come down to the club and immediately recognize that part of Hamilton. So here's some under construction photos of the layout, just to wrap things up here. The streets are made from 40 thou styrene sheet, painted with a rattle can of flat black, and then oversprayed with a texture paint from a distance so that you just kind of lighten up the black. The sidewalks are 1/8 inch thick Sintra. If you're not familiar with Sintra, it's a plastic material. It's soft enough that it cuts really easily, but it's also easy to score the panels for the sidewalks into it as well. Using the same type of material, we make foundations for the houses, and you can see the 5 houses in a row have little blocks that will be inside the house, which will ensure that the house do not move. They can't slide around on their foundations, so they kind of lock into place. Also makes it great if you want to take the houses off to super detail them, or just take them off for maintenance, or even change the order of the houses if you care to. You can see in the top left corner the Lifesaver building. This is a Walther's kit that we picked up from an estate. It's a 3-story building. The real Lifesaver building was only a 2-story building. So I'm currently removing the 3rd floor off the building and adding some other details to it to make something a little more representative of the Lifesaver factory. And here you see some of the houses along Cumberland Avenue. The 5 in a row are all Yelton kits. There are a few changes to them. You can see the one in the middle has a round window in the half-story. Simply by drilling out the material that was there and adding a round window just for some variety. A couple of them have porch columns that are half brick, half wood. One of them has a full wood porch column, different accent colors, even different brick colors. The one on the extreme right is that orangey colored brick. The ones in the middle are the brown colored brick. So just some variety that you could add to your structures. The 2 houses that are on the left-hand side of the picture, the one in the foreground is the very first Yelton house that was built, and the one next to it is a scratch-built house. That was the very first scratch-built house that we did as a test to see how long it would take, how much cost in purchasing Walther's brick material, Tichy windows, et cetera, and was part of the reason why we decided that we needed to find another alternative to scratch building 32 houses. And I think that's just about it. It is. So I'll take the share off and turn it back over to Paul.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks very much. If you want to end your share, we can go to full screen and hopefully see everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. If you want to unmute, if you've got some questions for Ron. Ron, I know I've got a couple, but let's let our participants go first. Don't forget to take yourself off mute.
Morning, Ron. It's Rodney from COD. Thanks very much. That was an excellent presentation. I wonder if you could go back over why you used the baking soda with the ACC, please.
Ron, you're muted.
He's still muted.
Yes, I'm going to see if I've got control here. Ron, lower left-hand corner of your, there you go.
Okay, I'm not sure that I understood the question. Are you asking why ACC or how to use the ACC?
No, I'm asking why you used the baking soda after you've applied the ACC.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good point. Well, to build up in the gap. I mean, you could put ACC in there, but you might have to use 2 or 3 applications before you get it to the level that you would expect it to be at. So the baking soda soaks up the ACC and fills in the gap for you, and that'll work on just about anything that you're building. It isn't a trick that you can use just on 3D products. Anything where you've got a bit of a gap bigger than the ACC is likely to stick. A little bit of baking soda sprinkled into the gap on the wet ACC will fill in the gap, harden, and then you can reshape it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from anyone for Ron?
I have one, Ron. It's Pat Ribard here.
Yeah.
Yes. Where did the hydro lines come in? The back alley, or were they all on the front of the sidewalks?
On that particular, like on Cumberland Avenue, they came in from the front. Now, we didn't add the hydro stacks and things to the houses, at least not yet anyways. I guess we were a little concerned about putting in all the wires because of that track you probably saw in the photo that cuts across Cumberland Avenue. A little concerned about things like derailments and stuff and how long the wires would last. So the question was, do we put the hydro stack in as a detail on the house? But how far do we go with the wiring? But to answer your
Thanks.
question, yeah, they were on the front side of the house.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Pat. Pat, if you want to go back on mute. Anyone else?
Hey, Ron, this is Ken. I was wondering, where'd you get the 1/8-inch Sintra from?
Here in Hamilton, there's a company called P&A Plastics. They're down on Main Street. But I think it's a fairly common product. It's often used for billboards. So if you've got a plastics distributor somewhere in your neighborhood, they probably carry it. It's expensive. A 4x8 sheet is about $80, which is quite expensive if you're only going to build 2 or 3 houses. But we use it as foundations under all the structures of the club. That way, they're all removable. It does come in a variety of colors. For some reason, white is the cheapest, which isn't always appropriate. You probably have to spray it with something that makes it look more like a concrete. But it does come in a very nice shade of gray as well.
If I can jump in as well, Ron, same issue that you have, Walter. I try to source from local sign makers, offcuts, and it depends on the material that the sign maker is using, of course. But you will, from time to time, find a company that's willing to sell stuff. I used to source from a firm out of downtown Toronto, but unfortunately, in the last 20 years, they've moved or gone out of business, and I can't find them. So, and I'm in a new area of Ontario, so I've been looking around the Kitchener-Waterloo, region of Waterloo area. So you can find businesses, and offcuts will save you a lot of money.
Definitely.
Any other questions? Ken, you were starting to come online.
I'm all set.
Yeah, I had a question, Ron. When you were painting the windows, you first said that you did it by hand, and then the second time you masked it. I was curious what ended up being more efficient there, because I'm sure that there's certain prep time to get your airbrush ready. There was also the prep time to make all the masks and so on. So what ended up working best for you?
Definitely painting them with the airbrush first, white,
Okay.
and then masking them with the little pieces of tape turned out to be a much quicker method. Of course, as you suggest, there's some setup time to make those little plastic templates, which I made up enough so that when we were building them at the club, everybody could share them. But to paint the windows with an airbrush, probably doesn't take more than about 10 minutes per house, maybe less than that, per house. Wait for it to dry a day or so, and then the masking probably doesn't take much more than half an hour to cut them out of pieces of tape and stick them on, and then you're ready to either use a rattle can or an airbrush or whatever method you want to paint the brick. If you're going to hand paint, it's probably not worth the trouble. If you're going to paint all the brick with a craft paint, but if you're going to do it either with a rattle can or an airbrush, it's definitely a quicker way to do it. And again, if you're building a lot of houses, it definitely speeds the process up.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks for the question. Maybe while we're just waiting for anyone else who might have a question, just a comment, looking across some of the names that I'm seeing on my screen, some of you have had some of the same thought as Ron was starting into his presentation, and that was, well, that's great. This is a house for downtown Hamilton, but how's it going to help me out as a modeler? I used to live in Oshawa, and one of the quick observations I made the first time I saw one of the early 3D printed units that the club was commissioning was, wow, this would fit just perfectly. I can't speak for your layout or any urban or even small town that you're modeling from across Southern Ontario. But I noticed over the years, after living in Oshawa for about 20 years, that there was a period I'm going to say in the 1920s and maybe into the early 1930s, before the Depression really set in and choked off the economy, that there was this flurry of brick home construction associated with the prosperity that came out of the end of the First World War. And a lot of the houses in those small areas in our downtown city areas, or even towns, seem to all be of a very, very similar design. And while they're not identical per se to what the Homes Club was wanting to do, they're pretty darn close. And yeah, I think then it becomes a volume issue. You know, do you go to one of the few kits that you can find? Because I don't think DPM has ever actually built any houses. They've sort of focused on kind of Main Street and commercial areas. So so I see the value in the kit from that standpoint at any rate. Any other questions from anyone?
I think brick houses are far more common, you know, in our part of the country than they are in others. But, you know, looking through things like the Walters catalog, there are very, very few brick homes, at least of this particular style. We originally looked at the, I think they're called Painted Ladies, which are the houses from San Francisco, because they were a 2.5 or 3-story house, and thought, well, you know, maybe we could do something with that style of kit. But of course, it's a wooden house. It's not a brick house. So totally wrong architecture. And, you know, scratch building or 3D printing was the only way to get something even close to what we wanted.
Another question while we're waiting to see if there are any others from the group. And by the way, we'll have probably about a 5-minute break. But if anyone needs to, now might be a good opportunity. You've got a bio break or you want to refresh your coffee cup. But anyway, a question for you, Ron. Let's say that I'm a modeler anywhere really in Ontario, and I see a presentation like this and I'm thinking, yeah, same dilemma. I can't find a kit in the Walters catalog or anywhere. How would I go about, just as Paul Hurley, a modeler, getting from I've seen a house and getting something that I might send off to, say, Shapeways? Could you walk us through that?
That's a good question. I've never really dealt with Shapeways specifically. I mean, Yelton models I'm a little more familiar with, but even what I do know about Yelton models, you know, you would probably have to provide some photographs and hopefully some accurate drawings. They can work from photographs, but I think sometimes they don't always turn out to be exactly the right size and shape, because it's difficult sometimes to estimate from a photo, you know, how wide is this house? How long is this house? So some very basic dimensions for the person actually doing the design work is really important.
I know that if I see a magazine article where someone, and I've certainly seen a number over the last decade, where someone will say as a part of building X, Y, or Z that they wanted to create something unique. I remember seeing one article a few years ago that a fellow created a really amazing a transom-like window for a scratch-built train station that he wanted to have sort of a signature piece. And he left out detail that makes it hard for somebody like me. So I know if you're going to Shapeways, I know enough to know they work best, or a contractor through Shapeways works best if you have a digital file. So how do you know how you got from the Dave Patterson diagrams to the actual file so that Yelton could print them out for you? Or did Yelton do all the handiwork of converting those drawings for you guys?
Yes, they did, because you could see from Dave's drawings, they were just you know, done with ink and pen, you know, on paper. And Yelton took those ink and pen sketches and converted them into a computer program, a drawing.
Has anyone on the call ever created a digital file so that they could have someone else do the resin printing for them, the 3D printing? Don't forget to unmute if you've got that to share. No one? Okay. Well, there's a research project for me.
I have one other question, Ron.
Okay, please.
It's Pat. You had trouble with the brick mortar with that stuff you had used at the beginning. Did you try anything else?
No, I did some research to see, could I make my own brick mortar formula? And there are some things on things like YouTube, where the people have suggested different ways of doing it. I think what was wrong was that when they designed the building, they actually made the mortar lines too big. And therefore, when you put the mortar mix onto it, it just highlights the fact that the mortar lines were probably a scale 1.5 to 2 inches wide instead of more like a 1/2 inch wide.
Gotcha.
And it just threw off the whole look of the building.
Yeah.
So it's not the fault of Robert's mortar. It was the way the building was printed. And I brought that to their attention, and they decided it wasn't worth all the trouble of redesigning the entire kit for that purpose. And the solution was not to use the brick mortar, but to use different shades of wash to eliminate that monotone look to the brick.
Thanks, Ron.
Following up on Pat's, what you did do is use washes rather than picking out individual bricks to provide some variety, right?
That's a good point. I did try that. I tried just doing individual bricks, and I found that the wash actually worked better, but not in large patches. A wash of maybe 3 or 4 bricks, maybe 2 rows, so that would be a total of maybe 5 bricks in the wash, but not large sections, because then it starts to look like a leopard, which wasn't the effect I was looking for either.
Ron, I like the way that effect was that you used on the mortar, and then you quit. It made it look like it was a lot older that way. For some reason, I kind of like the way it looked.
Well, and you know what?
Patchy.
Maybe that's just a personal choice, because I've used that Roberts brick formula on other structures and really like the way it turned out. And sometimes you do see brick where the lime is starting to leach out of the concrete, or not concrete, but the cement between the bricks. So maybe it's just a personal choice.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Ron.
Ron, I know I've got a couple more questions, but I'm looking at the clock and it's already 5 after 10. So we've had a good full discussion. So no, not at all. So I'm going to stop recording. And Ken, if you're okay, I'm still going to offer people a 5-minute break in case someone's been holding off for personal reasons. So if everyone's all right, including Ken.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Ken. I'm going to stop the recording.